The coastline is not fixed. It shifts, retreats, and quietly redraws the map. As oceans rise and land sinks, familiar places are becoming temporary. Some losses will happen slowly, others without warning. These are places already living on borrowed time. As sea levels continue to rise, some of the world's most iconic places are at risk of disappearing forever. From sinking cities to vanishing islands, here are 15 places that we're going to lose to rising sea levels. Number 15. Venice. Venice, Italy has long captured the imagination of travelers, earning it the nickname Floating City for its picturesque canals and seemingly weightless charm. Yet, as enchanting as this image may be, Venice's reality is far more ominous. It's sinking, and this isn't new information. The city's been sinking for years, and the forces behind it are varied and complex. Venice was built on a network of small islands in a lagoon, supported by millions of wood piles driven deep into the mud. Over time, though, this foundation has proven vulnerable. By the mid-20th century, scientists began to fully understand the scope of its sinking problem. Artesian wells drilled for fresh water in the early 1900s exacerbated the issue, as they drained the water table beneath the city, causing the ground to subside. Though these wells were shut down in the 60s, the damage had already been done. Venice was sinking by several inches per century, and things have only worsened with the changing climate. Today, Venice continues to sink by about 1 to 2 millimeters annually. Rising global sea levels do compound the problem. In fact, the sea level in Venice has risen by 32 centimeters since record-keeping began in 1872. The situation is becoming more urgent, with predictions suggesting that the city could be underwater by 2100. Venice's charm is undeniable, but its sinking status also makes it a city on the edge of disaster. Frequent acqua alta events, or high tides, floods the streets and piazzas, sometimes making 75% of the city impassable. Number 14. New Orleans. New Orleans, like Venice, is a city battling a slow and relentless sinking. It's built on marshland at the mouth of the Mississippi River, the city's geography and topography making it especially vulnerable to subsidence. Since its founding in the early 18th century, New Orleans has faced the challenge of staying above water. Today, it's sinking at an alarming rate, and the future doesn't look promising. The French Quarter, the oldest part of the city, was built on slightly higher ground, about 10 feet above sea level, but as the city expanded, new areas were built on much lower, marshy land. This flat geography means that every foot matters when it comes to flood risk, and much of the city's land is now well below sea level. Today, much of New Orleans lies between 5 to 10 feet below sea level and continues to sink at an average rate of about a centimeter per year. Combine that with rising sea levels, then scientists predict that by 2100, New Orleans could be between 8 to 13 feet below sea level. Hurricane Katrina in 2005 didn't just devastate the city, it also sped up the sinking process. The massive storm flooded 80% of New Orleans and caused severe erosion with the surrounding wetlands. Many houses there are now built on stilts to protect against flooding, particularly in low-lying areas. This architectural style is both a nod to the past and a necessary adaptation for a life in a sinking city. Number 13. Manhattan. Manhattan is the beating heart of New York City, and it's sinking, quite literally, under the weight of its own towering structures. It's not just rising sea levels that are threatening the city, but the sheer mass of over 1 million buildings. The city that never sleeps is slowly being pulled downward, and the relentless pace of construction only adds to that growing concern. Manhattan is sinking due to a combination of problems, with the most surprising being the physical weight of its buildings. A recent study published in the journal Earth's Future highlighted that New York City's 1,084,954 buildings weigh a staggering 1.68 trillion pounds. This enormous mass presses down on the Earth, causing it to sink at a rate of about 1 to 2 millimeters each year. That may seem small, but over decades, it adds up. Some areas, particularly built on softer soils, are sinking even faster, up to 4.5 millimeters per year. By 2050, the city could sink by up to 10 centimeters, which, when combined with the rising sea levels, could significantly increase the risk of flooding. With sea levels around New York rising more than twice as fast as the global rate, projected to rise about 8 to 30 inches by 2050, the subsidence could make storm surges and heavy rainfall even more dangerous. While this subsidence is a natural process that happens everywhere due to ground compression, it wasn't until recently that scientists specifically calculated the impact of New York City's buildings. The study that pinpointed this factor was published in 2023, marking a new understanding of how urbanization accelerates natural geological process. However, the sinking has been happening for decades, driven not only by the buildings, but also by human activities like groundwater pumping and construction on artificial fill. Number 12. The Maldives. The Maldives is a tropical paradise that's known for its crystal clear water, white sand beaches, and luxurious resorts, and it's facing an existential threat. This chain of islands in the Indian Ocean, with an average elevation of just 3 feet above sea level, is sinking at an alarming rate. As a low-lying country, the Maldives is one of the most vulnerable nations to climate change, and projections suggest that much of it could disappear within the next century. Several factors contribute to the sinking of the Maldives, but the most pressing is sea level rise. This phenomenon seems to be primarily driven by the warming of the Earth's climate, which does cause glacier and ice sheets to melt and ocean water to expand. The Maldives has seen a sea level rise of an average of 3 millimeters per year, but the situation is further worsened by the destruction of coral reefs. Coral reefs act as natural barriers protecting islands from wave energy and erosion. However, rising ocean temperatures and mass bleaching events like the one in 2016 that damaged 60% of the Maldives reefs have weakened this critical defense. Those coral reefs can absorb up to 97% of wave energy, but without them, the islands become more vulnerable to erosion and flooding. Number 11. China. China, one of the most populous and rapidly urbanizing countries in the world, is facing a critical environmental crisis. Its land is sinking. This phenomenon, known as land subsidence, is affecting a vast portion of the nation's urban areas, placing millions of lives and extensive infrastructure at risk. The country's largest cities, including Beijing, Shanghai, and Tianjin, are sinking at rates that have prompted urgent scientific study and government intervention. But what's causing this alarming subsidence, and what can be done to prevent further damage? Well, the answers lie in a combination of human activities, urban weight, and climate-driven changes that together create a complex and dangerous situation. Many urban areas, particularly those in northern China, have relied on underground aquifers to meet the need for water. However, this has led to an overpumping of groundwater, removing water faster than it can naturally be replenished. As the aquifer depletes, the land above them begins to sink. As a result, the earth beneath the cities is collapsing under its own weight, causing significant portions of urban China to sink. The massive weight of skyscrapers, roads, and other constructions compress the soil, leading to further subsidence. While this compaction is a natural process, human development accelerates it dramatically. In cities like Shanghai, which have experienced subsidence for decades, the weight of the city continues to push the land downwards, despite efforts to limit the damage. Quantifying the scale of this subsidence is both alarming and essential to understanding its full impact. Research has shown that nearly half of China's urban areas are sinking at a rate of at least 3 millimeters per year. In some of the worst affected areas, the rate is over 10 millimeters annually. This translates to around 270 million people living on land that is gradually sinking beneath them. Number 10. The Solomon Islands. The Solomon Islands, a beautiful yet vulnerable archipelago in the Pacific Ocean, are on the front lines of a climate crisis. With a population of just over 500,000, these tropical islands have experienced the devastating impact of rising sea levels over recent decades. 5 of the Solomon Islands have already been lost to the encroaching ocean. That's a stark warning of what the future might hold for the island nation. The Solomon Islands are a sovereign country made up of hundreds of islands that stretch across 11,000 square miles of the Pacific Ocean. These islands are beautiful, with lush vegetation, coral reefs, and pristine beaches. However, that very beauty is now under threat as sea levels rise at an alarming rate. The islands are vulnerable to this due to their low-lying geography and location in the Western Pacific, where rising seas are compounded by strong trade winds. The combination of these forces makes the Solomon Islands one of the hardest hit areas in the world when it comes to the impact of this sea level rise. For now, the country has already lost 5 islands, and the damage is not just limited to physical geography. The loss of land is also a cultural and economic blow to the people there. Entire communities are being displaced, and traditional ways of life are disappearing as the sea encroaches further inland. Number 9. California. California's beaches are iconic. Endless stretches of golden sand framed by rugged cliffs and the vast Pacific Ocean. The beaches here and the shores draw millions of visitors each year and are home to thriving beach communities. Yet beneath the surface of this idyllic image lies a growing crisis. Beach erosion, driven by sea level rise, is threatening to reshape California's coastline in ways that could have far-reaching consequences. At its core, beach erosion refers to the gradual wearing away of land as it is swept into the sea. In California, this process is intensifying due to rising sea levels. First, the oceans are warming up due to increasing greenhouse gas emissions. As the water heats up there, it expands, and that thermal expansion is responsible for much of the observed sea level rise. Second, the melting of ice sheets in Greenland and Antarctica contributes significantly to the rising ocean levels. This melting land ice introduced vast amounts of fresh water into the ocean, further raising water levels. Together, those factors are steadily pushing the sea inland, devouring the sands and land that define California's shoreline. The future projections, too, are alarming. According to research, California could see sea level rise between 2 to 7 feet by the end of this century, with the worst-case scenarios predicting up to 10 feet. For every meter of sea level rise, the shoreline could retreat by more than 100 feet. In the most extreme cases, some studies estimate that as much as 75% of California's beaches could disappear by 2100. The erosion of those beaches carry a significant consequence not only for the beautiful communities that line the coast, but for the state as a whole. Coastal properties, many of which are luxurious and highly valued, are directly in harm's way, and as the land erodes, home, businesses, and public spaces may face destruction or need to be abandoned altogether. Number 8. London. So, London may not be a beach town, but it is in fact considered a coastal city, and it is also at risk of being submerged by rising tides of the Thames River. The alarming truth is that sea level rise is slowly but surely eroding the safety of this iconic metropolis, leaving many to wonder, how the hell did we get here, how serious is the threat, and what does the future hold for London? While London isn't situated along a traditional coastline, its location on the River Thames places it in a precarious position. The rising global sea levels, coupled with increasing storm surges, are causing the river to swell beyond its normal capacity. The map produced by Climate Central, a key source of recent alarm, predicts that by 2050 much of London could be underwater, if significant actions aren't taken. Particularly vulnerable areas, including those along the Thames, where water levels are expected to rise far beyond current flood protections, the rising sea levels threatening London are caused by 2 primary factors: the thermal expansion of the warming seawater and the melting of polar ice sheets. More water is introduced into the oceans, which is then seeping into river systems like the Thames, causing the water level to rise and increasing the risk of flooding. With each foot of rising water, London's defences become more strained. A key point of concern is that while London has a robust flood defence, such as the famous Thames Barrier, these measures may not be enough to protect against future water levels without significant upgrades. Number 7. Lagos. Lagos is the largest city in Nigeria and one of Africa's most populous urban centres. It faces a grim future as rising sea levels, coastal erosion, and unchecked urbanization threaten to slowly swallow the city. Despite its reputation for its bustling markets and thriving industries, Lagos is becoming a focal point in the global narrative of cities at risk of sinking. But Lagos isn't typically associated with flooding, as much of the region battles droughts and other climate extremes. So how is it that Lagos, a coastal city, is slowly but surely being lost to the sea? Recent studies, such as those from the Nigerian Conservation Foundation and Climate Central, have raised alarms about the city's future. According to some projections, Lagos could experience catastrophic flooding by 2050, with areas less than 3 feet above sea level entirely submerged. As the planet warms, polarized capsule melt and seawater expands, contributing to a global rise in ocean levels. Nigeria's Atlantic coastline, where Lagos sits, is no exception. Predictions suggest that sea levels could rise by 6 feet by the end of the century. The city's drainage system, or lack thereof, compounds this problem. Trash-clogged gutters and inadequate infrastructure worsen the flooding during Lagos' heavy rainy seasons. Rainwaters get nowhere to go, causing floodwaters to rise quickly in both wealthy and low-income areas. Coastal erosion further eats away at the city's protective barriers, while uncontrolled urban growth puts additional pressure on an already vulnerable landscape. Number 6. Honolulu. Honolulu, the capital of Hawaii, faces a slow but dire fate as sea levels continue to rise, threatening one of its most iconic features, Waikiki Beach. This sandy shoreline is renowned for its natural beauty and rich surf culture. It's now ground zero for Hawaii's growing battle with rising tides. While tropical beaches like Waikiki may seem the least likely to disappear into the ocean, experts predict that the city's low-lying coast could experience frequent flooding within the next 15 to 20 years. Rising seas have the potential to flood not only the beach, but also thousands of buildings, roads, and critical infrastructure. Floodwaters already reach parts of the beach during high tides, and as sea levels rise, those occurrences will become more and more frequent and more devastating. Current projections show that more than 6,000 buildings and 20,000 people could be at risk, with vital assets like airports and ports becoming increasingly vulnerable. In the past few years, high tides have already caused seawater to flow onto Waikiki's bustling streets and footpaths. These sunny day floods happen even without storms. It's a clear indication of how vulnerable this area has become. The predictions are pretty sobering. More frequent and more severe flooding will reshape Waikiki and other parts of Oahu in the next few decades. The sad reality is if sea levels continue to rise unchecked, there may be a future where Waikiki Beach, as it's known today, ceases to exist. Number 5. Norfolk. Norfolk, a historical coastal city in southeastern Virginia, is on the front lines of sea level rise. Situated along the Chesapeake Bay, it's home to the world's largest naval base, a vibrant port, and a growing population. Known for its relatively moderate climate, the city's natural balance has been thrown off by unusual and persistent changes in weather patterns. Norfolk's climate has traditionally been humid subtropical, with mild winters and hot, humid summers. However, in recent years, the city has seen a dramatic increase in rainfall, which is one of the major drivers behind its ongoing flooding issues. Typically, Norfolk would receive about 47 inches of rainfall per year, but recently this number has increased by several inches annually. And while an inch or two may not seem like much, over time, this accumulation has caused disastrous effects. The land in Norfolk and much of southeastern Virginia is sinking at rates of up to 6 mm per year. Combined with sea levels rising about 3 mm per year globally, this region is going to experience over 9 mm of effective land loss annually. This trend is driven largely by sea level changes, and warmer ocean temperatures will result in more moisture in the atmosphere, which leads to heavier and more frequent rainstorms. Additionally, the warmer air can hold more water vapor, causing storms to dump even more rain when they happen. Decades of extracting water faster than it can be replenished in the ground aquifers have left the region's land soft and susceptible to sinking. Norfolk has become the East Coast's most vulnerable city to sea level rise, with the region expected to face more dramatic landscape changes in the coming decades. One of the city's most ambitious efforts to combat this flooding is a massive floodwall project designed in part with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. This project includes levees, pump stations, tide gates, and natural defenses like oyster reefs and shoreline vegetation. It is one of the largest infrastructure projects in the city's history, and it will serve as a critical barrier against future floods. Number 4. Alexandria. Alexandria, Egypt's second-largest city and one of the most iconic ancient metropolises, faces a dire and ironic fate, its gradual sinking while the Mediterranean Sea relentlessly rises. Known for its ancient wonders like the fabled Lighthouse of Alexandria and the historic Library of Alexandria, the city, founded by Alexander the Great in 331 BCE, has withstood millennia of natural and human-made disasters. Yet today, the twin forces of rising sea levels and sinking land are threatening Alexandria's existence. The land on which Alexandria rests, along with much of the Nile Delta, is sinking at an alarming rate of more than 3 millimeters a year. This subsidence is exacerbated by human activity. Dams upstream on the Nile prevent the natural replenishment of silt that once fortified the delta's soil. On the other side, the Mediterranean Sea is rising. The United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change warns that by 2100, global sea levels could rise by as much as 3 feet. The projections are grim. By 2050, even in the most optimistic scenarios, 1/3 of Alexandria could be underwater, with up to 1.5 million of its 6 million residents forced to leave their homes. Alexandria's slow sinking into the Mediterranean is not a sudden disaster, but a creeping catastrophe that's already begun to impact people. Flooding events in 2015 and 2020, exacerbated by storms and rising seas, have weakened infrastructure. In one of the city's low-lying neighborhoods, El Max, homes flood every winter, and residents are increasingly resigned to the reality that their community may one day be submerged. The region has already witnessed the sea advance nearly 2 miles inland since the 1960s, with iconic landmarks like the 19th-century lighthouse at Rosetta vanishing into the sea. But beyond the monetary cost of trying to fix all this, the human toll is going to be profound. As Alexandria continues to sink, residents are caught between the pressures of staying in a city that may soon be uninhabitable and the uncertainty of leaving behind their homes, jobs, and community. The population is growing rapidly, adding further strain to the city's infrastructure. With nearly 2 million additional residents leaving in the last decade alone, the city's fragile systems are cracking under the weight of both environmental and human pressures. Number 3. Kiribati. Tucked away in the expanse of the Pacific Ocean lies Kiribati, a small island nation composed of 32 atolls and one raised coral island. Despite its expansive spread, Kiribati's total land area amounts to a mere 313 square miles, and its highest point barely rises 6.5 feet above sea level. Once known for its idyllic scenery, palm trees, coral reefs, and clear blue waters, Kiribati is now the poster child for the devastating effects of sea level rise. With levels rising, threatening to consume its land, the nation's future hangs in a precarious balance. Kiribati has become a global symbol of the existential dangers posed by global warming, making it clear that small island nations are on the front lines. For over 3 decades, Kiribati has been experiencing gradual but unmistakable rise in sea levels. Since the 1990s, sea levels in the area have risen by approximately 2 to 4 inches. Projections by NASA and other climate scientists say that this trend will only accelerate. The numbers here translate into real, life-altering consequences for the people of Kiribati. Villages on the outer islands have already disappeared beneath the waves. Freshwater supplies have been contaminated by saltwater intrusion, and coastal erosion is eating away at what little land remains. Compounding all the natural vulnerabilities is the island's growing population. Since independence from Britain in 1979, Kiribati's population has boomed, particularly in the capital, South Tarawa, where nearly half of the nation's 110,000 people reside. South Tarawa is one of the most densely populated places on Earth, with settlements stretching in a near-continuous strip along a narrow causeway of land. Overpopulation has put immense pressure on the island's limited resources, resulting in environmental degradation, pollution, and a heavy reliance on imported goods. As more people migrate from the outer islands to urban centers like South Tarawa, driven in part by economic opportunity and the loss of rural land to the sea, the strain on the environment and the country intensifies. Number 2. Bangladesh. So, Bangladesh is no stranger to water. Its history has been shaped by the regular rise and fall of rivers, floods, and the seasonal onslaught of monsoons. However, in recent decades, this delicate relationship with water has taken a drastic turn, as the effects of climate change, rising sea levels, and land subsidence push the country towards a dangerous tipping point. The question is Bangladesh winning this battle, or is it on the verge of losing its long-standing war with water? Historically, people of Bangladesh have demonstrated an extraordinary ability to adapt to the natural rhythms of flooding. For centuries, rural communities farmed the fertile plains during dry seasons and retreated when the water levels rose. Flooding was not only accepted, but embraced as part of life. It replenished the soil and sustained agriculture, making the country's vast river delta one of the most fertile regions of the world. When the land became temporarily unusable, many sought work in the cities, relying on the annual flood cycle to shape their livelihoods. Yet today, floods and rising tides are far more sinister and unpredictable than those of the past. The Ganges Delta, which covers 2/3 of Bangladesh and is home to nearly 200 million people, stands at the forefront of this struggle. Storms that once occurred once a decade could soon strike 3 to 15 times per year by 2100, driven by changing sea levels and more violent weather patterns. This new reality is forcing rural Bangladeshis into an impossible choice: adapt or abandon their way of life. Sea level rise and subsidence in Bangladesh form a dangerous synergy. While the land sinks, the waters rise. Current estimates suggest that by 2100, sea levels in the Ganges Delta could rise by as much as 4.5 feet, nearly double previous projections by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which didn't fully account for land subsidence. With the delta's average elevation standing less than a meter above sea level, these projections spelt disaster for the region's agricultural productivity, freshwater supplies, and the ability of its people to live on fragile land. Number 1. Jakarta. Jakarta, the Indonesian capital, home to over 10 million people, is disappearing into the ground. It isn't just slowly sinking either, it's sinking faster than any other city on Earth. This megacity, a bustling hub of economic activity and cultural history, faces a critical existential crisis. If nothing is done, much of it could be underwater by 2050. North Jakarta in particular is sinking at a staggering rate, with projections of 95% of the district will be submerged by mid-century. How did this happen, and what makes Jakarta the fastest sinking in the world? Well, its location is both a blessing and a curse. Built on swampy, low-lying land near the Java Sea and crisscrossed by 13 rivers, Jakarta has always been prone to flooding. Seasonal monsoons and high tides have regularly battered the city, but in recent decades, this natural flooding has been exacerbated by a deeper, more alarming issue: land subsidence. Parts of the city, especially North Jakarta, have sunk by an astonishing 8 feet in the past decade. The city is sinking by an average of 1 to 15 centimeters per year, with the worst affected areas like North Jakarta sinking by up to 25 centimeters annually. In comparison, the global average for coastal cities is far lower, making Jakarta's situation uniquely dire. Experts warn that if the current trends continue, nearly half of Jakarta could be below sea level by 2050. Even as the city sinks, though, property developers continue to build expensive apartments in North Jakarta, seemingly undeterred by the risks. For the 1.8 million people who live in the area, sinking land and recurrent floods are part of daily life. Several factors contribute to Jakarta's worsening situation. First, the city's reliance on groundwater extraction remains largely unchanged. Despite efforts to improve water infrastructure, many residents, particularly in poorer areas, still rely on wells. The lack of an adequate piped water system puts increasing pressure on the underground aquifers, which continue to deplete. Second, climate change is exacerbating the city's sinking problem. While land subsidence is the primary driver, rising sea levels are adding another layer of risk. Seasonal monsoons, more intense than in the past, are also contributing to these worsening conditions, with rainwater having nowhere to drain due to the city's sinking ground. But recognizing the gravity of the situation, the Indonesian government has taken several steps to address Jakarta's sinking problem. The most radical solution has been the decision to relocate the nation's capital from Jakarta to Nusantara, a new planned city on the island of Borneo. Announced in 2019, the move aims to reduce pressure on Jakarta and allow for more sustainable urban development in a location less prone to environmental disasters. While this plan is ambitious, it doesn't solve Jakarta's immediate problems. Millions of people will remain in the city even after the capital moves. What's disappearing isn't just land, but history, culture, and entire ways of life. Rising seas don't arrive as a single disaster, but as a permanent change. The question is no longer if these places will be altered. It's how much will remain when the water stops rising.